This is just I wrote here just again the definition for each of the conjectures, kind of a summary from yesterday. So the weak gravity conjecture, if you remember, tell us that given a gauge theory, there must exist some electrically charged states with a charge to mass ratio bigger than the charge to mass ratio of an extremal black hole in that theory. And the distance conjecture means that there is an infinite tower of states becoming exponentially light at any infinite distance limit of the moduli space. So these two conjectures were formulated completely independently in different papers. But in recent years, we are starting to think more and more that at least, I mean, for sure they are connected, but maybe that they could be two different phases of the same phenomena. Because the weak gravity conjecture, even if the motivation from black holes only motivates the existence of some state, one state, in string theory, we always find something stronger, which is the existence of a full tower of sublattice, like infinitely many states satisfying the conjecture. And this reminds a lot to the distance conjecture, where the important thing is that you don't get just one state becoming light, but infinitely many of them. And the difference is that in one case, the conjecture is giving you information about how the cutoff of the EFT behaves with the gauge coupling. Okay, this is like the mass of the states. So since if the gauge coupling becomes small, then the mass is upper bounded, so the mass has to go to zero. That's why the EFT breaks down. So this is for the weak gravity conjecture, and for the distance conjecture, it gives us information about how the cutoff behaves in terms of the field distance. But in all the examples that we have in string theory, it's the same tower of states that satisfies both conjectures. So probably there is a way to reformulate this such that we just talk about a single tower. Okay, so the common feature, the universal pattern in both cases is that it's the existence of towers of states when we take some weak coupling limit, so some gauge coupling goes to zero, or some infinite distance limit. Okay, so we move to the boundary of the field space. And this is what, so today what we are going to do is to take this universal feature, so the fact that there are towers of states becoming light at small gauge couplings or large field distances, and argue for these towers from the perspective of string theory. So far, all we have done is always thinking of black hole physics and so on, but in the Swampland program, it's very important to combine both bottom-up arguments based on black holes to get an idea of what are the general principles, but also concrete tests in string theory, because even if we just focus on string theory, and then you could say, okay, I don't know if it's general or not, string theory is a perfect framework to test all these things because it allows us to make quantitative and sharp proofs and tests of all these ideas. So at least we can be sure that they are realized in string theory. So today we will focus on string theory. Is there any question before we start? About yesterday or what I just said now? Okay, good. So before starting with string theory, let me make some comment about this cutoff. So I'm saying all the time that the presence of this tower of states is going to imply that the EFT, the effective field theory, breaks down in a drastic way because we cannot have infinitely many fields weakly coupled to Einstein gravity. So there is no way to have a QFT description anymore. But how do we properly quantify this cutoff? Okay, so the point is we have this tower of states. Okay, and this is like the first one, M0, Then we have M1, M2, and different masses. And they typically will have a relation like n to some power where n is the oscillation number. So this is n equals 1, n equals 2, and so on, times M0. And for the case of, for example, of a KK tower, we will see that this is just, right, like n is nm0. And then you have the full tower of states. Okay, so the point is, how do you quantify the quantum gravity cutoff? I mean, if we just have, I mean, there is some cutoff, we can call it lambda 0, which is just the mass of the first state. Okay, so this is the moment in which we hit the first mode of the tower. But I can always integrate in one state. So one state is not problematic. The problem is that I have many of them. So there is a species scale, which is really the scale at which the QFT description is going to break down and quantum gravity matters. And this is going to happen at some like intermediate state. And it's going to be given by M Planck d dimension over n1 over d minus 2. So d is the space-time dimension. And n is the number of states below or at the species scale. Okay, so it's like you count how many states you have. So if we have, for example, the way to do it would be to integrate over the density of states. Let's put density of states that are given energy E, and we integrate up to the species scale. Okay. So in the case of a KK tower like this is just lambda species over M0. Okay. Because this is the number, since I have one per each level, the number of states is just divided the maximum cutoff over the mass gap. Okay, this is for the KK tower. Okay, so this is the scale at which quantum gravity becomes important. Quantum gravity becomes important. And any local QFT in any dimension is going to break down. You cannot have a quantum field theory description anymore. Okay, so why is this? I mean, why this is the scale that matters? Okay. There are several ways to argue for this. One is renormalization of the Planck scale. So if you have many states that are weakly coupled to Einstein gravity, you can compute loops on the graviton propagator, right? So this is the graviton. And then you have all the different states running in loops, and they all contribute because they all interact with gravity. And this is going to renormalize the Planck scale such that the quantum gravity scale becomes gets lower than the Planck scale. Okay, so it's kind of a quantum effect. Another way to argue for this is based on black hole physics, because you can take some box of size L. I have a box in my universe, and I impose some entropy bound in the sense that the entropy of this box have to be smaller. So entropy of the box has to be smaller than the entropy of a black hole of the same area. Okay, this is like the covariant entropy bound before the system collapses to a black hole. Okay. Now the entropy of the box is going to depend on how many states I can fit in the box. So if you put all these particles here, okay, this is going to give you an upper bound on how many states, how many species you can have, because the entropy will grow with the number of species. So if you do this carefully, you obtain indeed that the number of species have to go as lambda minus 1. Well, let me put L first. It goes as L. One over D minus 2, where L is the size of the box. And you can do this experiment for the smallest value of L that you could trust in your effective field theory. So this is the smallest black hole that you can trust at the semi-classical level, which is giving you a cutoff of the EFT. So 1 over L is the quantum gravity cutoff, okay? It's the size of the smallest black hole that you can trust. And that's how one recovers again the species. Sorry, this is multiplying. This is a typo. Yeah, this is how one recovers the species scale. Okay? Any question? Okay, good. So this is something to keep in mind, okay? There are, with all these towers, there are always two scales that are interesting. One is the mass of the first state, and the other one is this species scale at which quantum gravity will become important and the EFT drastically breaks down, okay? Now, in this case of the Keiki tower, if you combine both equations, okay, so this is 1 and this is 2. So 1 plus 2. Okay, if you plug one into the other, you obtain that lambda, the species scale, goes as m Planck over d minus 2, d minus 1, m0, 1 over d minus 1. Okay, so you can write the species scale in terms of the mass of the tower. So you can relate both scales. And you can see that the difference is just some polynomial power here that will depend on the number of space-time dimensions. Okay, so the goal now is to take string theory examples and identify these towers. We're gonna start with the easiest and more clear examples, and then we will start complicating the story to show how every time we take one of these limits and go to infinite distance in the modular space or weak gauge coupling, we get this tower of states, and we will see what is the nature of the state and what is the species scale associated to it, and how this matches with the string theory expectation. Okay, so let's start. So the first example I'm gonna take is a 10-dimensional string theory, okay? It's the simplest thing we can think of. We just take type 2A in 10 dimensions. And I wrote here what is the axiom, so don't worry, I'm not sure, I guess it will depend on the person. Don't worry if you don't know too much about string theory. I will write here everything we need to know in order to understand the computation, okay? So here, all you need is that we have some Einstein term, of course. Then we have some scalar fields. So in this case, the modular space is just one-dimensional. We just have the dilaton, which parameterizes the string coupling. And then we have different gauge fields. This is the field strength for a two-form gauge field, which is an Evers-Bars field. And this is another gauge field, which is the field strength of a one-form gauge field, which is Ramon-Ramon. And then we'll have more Ramon-Ramon gauge fields, but it's not interesting for us right now. Okay, so what are the possible infinite distance limits that I have in this theory? Well, I have two options. One is that I can send the string coupling to 0. Okay, so it means that I'm sending S to infinity. And this is going to be at infinite distance, right? Because the geodesic distance that I travel in the field space, let me call it delta phi, is gonna be the integral, right, of the field metric, the square root of the metric. And this, since the metric is 1 over S squared, right, this is the integral of 1 over S ds. And this is just, well, I have here some factor 2. Let me be careful with the numerical factors. 2S. This is equal square root of 2 log s. Okay, so I'm taking a convention in which a canonically normalized scalar field is just given by 1/2 d phi squared. Okay. Okay, so the distance behaves as the logarithm of s, which means that if s goes to infinity, this is at infinite distance. Okay, so this is the limit in which the string coupling goes to 0. And then what happens? I mean, do I have a tower becoming light? Yes. This tower corresponds to all the string modes that become light, all the string excitations, because since the string coupling is going to 0, all the string excitations are becoming light in Planck units. So the mass of the string states in type 2A behaves in this way with the string coupling, so that if you write it in terms of the canonically normalized field, you get the exponential behavior. Okay. So you get indeed a tower that behaves exponentially, and then this tower of states is charged under this one form, Ramon. Sorry, not the Ramon, the Nevers-Vars. The string, right, is charged under the Nevers-Vars field, so that we can check also that the weak gravity conjecture is satisfied. So the gauge coupling for the 2-form gauge field goes as GS to the 1/2. So indeed, the tension of the string, which is the string scale square, behaves as the gauge coupling. Okay, so the strings are becoming light, and indeed, they satisfy the gravity conjecture. No, they go linearly with the gauge coupling in Planck units. Okay, so this is string perturbative limit. And then both the distance conjecture and the gravity conjecture are satisfied. Okay. Good. Is there any other limit that we can take? Yes. I mean, not only s going to infinity is at infinite distance, also if s goes to minus infinity, right, to 0, it's at infinite distance. So, yeah, sorry, if s goes to 0, it's also at infinite distance in this metric. And s going to 0 means gs goes to infinity. Okay. So we can also take the strong coupling limit, which is also at infinite distance in this moduli space. And then the states that become light, if you check the spectrum of type 2A, are D0 branes. So you get that you have D0 branes that behave as the string scale over GS. So they become light when GS goes to infinity. And if you write it in Planck units, it's always very important to write it in terms of the Planck mass. Okay, this is how these conjectures are formulated. So the M in terms of the Planck mass, again, this goes exponentially with a factor, which in this case is 3 square root of 2/4. Okay, good. So in this case, the D0 branes satisfy this, and then the gauge coupling, these D0 branes are charged under the Ramon gauge field. And since the gauge coupling behaves as 1/GS 3/4, which we can just get from the Lagrangian, again, it makes sense because they are BPS, but it means that the mass goes proportional to the gauge coupling, so both the weak gravity and the distance conjecture are satisfied by the same states. And if we didn't know about M theory, with this conjecture, you could have already predicted that since we get this tower of states becoming light, something must happen. And what happens in this case is that the theory decompactifies. So the masses has here the spectrum of a Keiki tower, so you can understand it as decompactification. It's a decompactification limit that we go to M theory. Okay. Very good. Any question? Okay. So let's take another example and then we'll start complicating a bit the story. So the other typical example is that, okay, now instead of just 10 dimensions, let's compactify in 1 dimension. So we are in 9 dimensions and we have a new modulus, which is the radius of the circle, okay? This is the next thing that we can do. Okay, so in this case, let me just focus now on this because for the dilaton is going to be the same. So let me just focus now on this new modulus that appears, which parameterizes the size of the circle. So if I have this Einstein term in the dimension, when I compactify on a circle, I get some new scalar which parameterizes the radius. So this is R is the radius of the circle, and this is given in terms of the canonically normalized field by this relation, okay? This exponential behavior, where, let me remove this. Yes. So, and then we have the Kaluza-Klein photon, okay, coming also from gravity, where the gauge coupling of the Kaluza-Klein photon is parameterized by the radius, where with this alpha given by 2 times square root of d minus 1, d minus 2, okay? Where this is again the space-time dimension. So in this case, d is going to be equal to 9. Okay. So what are the possible limits now? Well, we can take the radius go to infinity, right? And then whenever we have a cycle and we make the circle very large, what we get are Kaluza-Klein modes that become light. And they become light in terms of 1 over R, right? Of the radius. And this, if you write it carefully, becomes equivalent that in terms of the canonically normalized field, so the geodesic distance, it's given by it preserves the exponential behavior that we are expecting. Okay, so Kaluza-Klein modes satisfy the distance conjecture, and also they saturate the weak gravity conjecture because the gauge coupling behaves in the same way on the field distance. And if you check the order 1 factors, you actually see that it saturates exactly the weak gravity conjecture, okay? So again, both conjectures are satisfied by the same tower of states, and in this case, we get the compactification. Okay. Now, we can take another limit, which is also at infinite distance, which is that the radius goes to 0. Okay, so this is also the infinite distance in this metric, in this space. And in this case, we should also get some tower becoming light. Now, if I am just in field theory, there is nothing that becomes light when the radius goes to 0. But if I am in string theory, there is something that becomes light, which are all the winding modes. Okay, so we have wrapping strings or wrapping branes, the circle, and these states become light when the circle becomes small. Okay, so this conjecture is telling you that that if you have, for a consistent theory of quantum gravity, you need to have extended objects. Because if you have extra dimensions and you send some cycle to small value, you must have something that wraps the cycle such that it becomes light, it becomes massless in the limit in which the radius goes to 0. So even if we didn't know anything about string theory, just with this conjecture, predicts existence of extended objects like strings or branes. So there is something that becomes light in this infinite distance limit. And well, as if you know about string theory, then you know that the mass of these winding modes is actually equivalent to the mass of the KK modes if I exchange the radius by alpha prime, which is the string scale over the radius. Okay, so the winding modes are also going to decay exponentially in terms of the distance and are going to satisfy the gravity conjecture. And they also signal a decompactification of the theory in a dual frame. Okay, so the point is that in a dual frame, like if I go now to type 2B and I exchange the radius by 1 over the radius, what I'm doing by sending the original radius to 0 is to decompactify the new theory. So I can also think that, I mean, it's just a matter of frame, it's a matter of description. The physics that is happening is that I'm also decompactifying. And these states are what are behind what you learn at the beginning of string theory as T-duality. Okay, so this is like the basic things that we learn from string theory, but how, yeah, like to show you how natural it is to have these towers in string theory, even if they are surprising from an EFT perspective. Any question? Okay, good. So to summarize these two examples, what is happening, right, is that we get towers of states at asymptotic limits in the field space, such that there is a cutoff. Sorry, I wanted to say, well, I can see it now. So there is an original cutoff given by the first mass of the states, which causes the gauge coupling and behaves exponentially. In the case of the compactification, the species scale, okay, that I didn't say, the species scale behaves, I mean, you can compute the species scale, like for example, let me do it. If I go from 5D to 4D, okay, the species scale is given by M, the mass of the Keiki tower to 1/3. Okay, this is just using the formula I gave you before. And since the Keiki tower goes as 1 over the radius, right? Here I should also have the Planck, okay? Then the species scale matches precisely with the Planck mass in 5 dimensions, okay? So when you compactify, the M Planck in 5 dimensions is a cube, is given by the volume. So this is 4, is given by the volume times the M Planck in 5 dimension cube. So that if you replace this here, right? Let's use the same letter. Then 1 over the radius to 1/3 times the M Planck in 4 dimensions is just the M Planck in 5 dimensions. Okay, so the first state of the tower is the Keiki scale, but the species scale associated to a Kaluza-Klein tower is the Planck mass of the higher dimensional theory. And this is a general thing that happens whenever we decompactify, okay? So the species scale is associated to the higher dimensional in Planck, so that even if you didn't know that you are decompactifying, just because of the presence of the tower, you can guess what is the quantum gravity scale of the theory, which is not the 4-dimensional in Planck, is the 5-dimensional in Planck, because the theory is actually higher dimensional. Okay, and this is a scale in which quantum gravitational effects become important. Okay, and in this case of the string perturbative limits that we also saw, since for each oscillation number, you actually have an exponential degeneracy of states. That's something that you learn in string theory. When you compute the species bound associated to the string excitation modes, you get that it's just the string scale. So this is telling you that already at the string scale, the mass of the first higher spin state, so the mass of the first state of my tower, quantum gravity becomes important. Like quantum field theory breaks down, and it needs to incorporate higher spin states. And I can only describe this with a higher spin theory, like for example, string theory. Okay. Okay, so these are like the two cases we have seen. And just to finish this, to comment on this. So we started, like, for example, we were, to summarize, we started with type 2A. If we take the GS going to zero limit, then we recover perturbative string theory. If we take GS goes to infinity, we then compactify to M theory. If this is the radius, so this is like, this direction is the dilaton, now this direction is going to be the radius. If I take radius goes to infinity, I decompactify. If I take radius going to zero, I decompactify but to the dual theory, which is type 2B. So this, I mean, all this game, I mean, the presence of the towers is what is behind all the string dualities that we know and love, and all the connections between the different string theories. So the fact that everything is connected and we have these string dualities is really at the core of this distance conjecture. And trying to understand why this conjecture is true in quantum gravity is like understanding why we have always all these relations. Why whenever we go to the boundary of the moduli space, there is a tower that hints a new weakly coupled description of the theory. And it's behind all these string dualities, okay? Okay. Any question?
Excuse me.
Yes.
In your previous slide, type 2A on S1.
Yes.
I want to ask what quantity plays the role of the coupling if we include the dilaton beside the radius, beside the phi component of the metric in 10 dimension. I mean, we have two scalars, one,
yes,
which is this phi, and the other the dilaton.
Yes.
What, in this case, what quantity plays the role of the coupling constant G, for example?
So for the KK photon, phi is the radius of the circle, right? So it depends. I mean, there are different gauge fields here. Here I was just writing the Kaluza-Klein photon that arises from compactifying. And for this one, the gauge coupling is parameterized by the radius by phi, no, of the circle. If I think of other gauge fields, like the Ramon-Ramon gauge fields and the Nevers-Bars fields that arise from the 10-dimensional Ramon-Ramon and Nevers-Bars fields, then the gauge coupling will be parameterized by the dilaton mainly, and then this will be the important one. Okay, so for each scalar, you can think that there is, or if you think like each infinite distance limit is associated to some particular weak coupling limit. And you have different infinite distance limits, and in each of them there will be a different gauge coupling that goes to zero from a different gauge field. Does this answer the question?
I guess it would be a combination of the e to the phi, your phi, and the dilaton, in the case that we include dilaton as well. Dilaton as well as this phi.
Here, notice that here I am in the Einstein frame, okay? Mm-hmm. So in the string frame, you also have the dilaton in front, but you have to write everything in Planck units. So in the Einstein frame, I mean, for the KK photon is the radius. For the Ramon-Ramon Nevers-Bars fields, it's true that probably even going to the Einstein frame, you have a combination of both. Okay, so you have to, I mean, you can, here I'm doing the easy thing, no? Like just taking one or another one, but you can also take combination of different scalars going to infinity. And then the question is, which one is the leading tower and which one, what gauge coupling goes to zero the fastest? So there might be more than one because there might be combinations. You have to identify which one is the fastest. And for the Ramon-Ramon, for the Nevers-Bars, actually, not for the Ramon-Ramon. The Ramon-Ramon will only depend on the radius, but for the Nevers-Bars, you have this phi dependence, the dilaton dependence, and then the gauge coupling will depend on both. But you have to go to the Einstein frame, okay?
Okay. Thanks.
More questions?
excuse me. Excuse me. So is it correct to conclude that if we have a higher dimensional gravity theory, the cutoff of the effective field theory on the lower dimensional manifold is like the Planck mass of the higher dimensional theory?
So it depends on what is the asymptotic region that you are. Like you can think that like this star that you put here is like parameter space or the moduli space. Depends on what corner you are. There is a tower that will dominate, like will become light, and this tower will have some species scale associated to it. If we are in a regime in which the leading tower is a Kaluza-Klein tower, then yes, the cutoff, the maximum value of the cutoff, I mean, at which quantum gravity appears, is going to be the Planck mass of a higher dimensional theory. But it could also be that we are in a region in which what dominates are some string modes, and therefore the cutoff is given by the species bound, the string scale. So it depends on what region of the space you are. And you cannot, I think there is no recipe to know purely from bottom up where you are, like what is the nature of the tower that is going to, if you can get information about the tower, then you can guess which one of the two is, because they have a different structure. But if you don't know yet from a bottom up perspective, what is the tower that will appear, there is so far no way to distinguish if it's going to be one or the other. But these are the two possibilities, either the Planck mass of the higher dimensional theory or the string scale.
Thank you.
I'm saying string scale, but you can also, some people call it just like the gap to the higher spin states, okay? So like in ADS-CFT, typically you call this just the gap to the first higher spin mode. Okay.
Thank you.
More questions? Okay, so just to understand, because now I want to describe some more complicated examples in string theory. So just to get an idea of the level, all of you that are listening, can you raise your hand if what I said up to now about Tie2A string theory and these weak up limits, the duality, the compactification, and so on, whether you already knew this, like even if you didn't think about it from the perspective of the Swamplan and the distance conjecture, whether you have learned this in string theory, like these possible limits. So if you knew this before, please like in the participant chat or something, like raise your hand or something. Okay, good. I think nobody is raising the hand, so let's now try the opposite thing. Raise your hand if you didn't know this before. Come on, you cannot be so shy. Good, I see already one hand. So if you didn't know this before, don't be afraid, just raise your hand so I get an idea of the level. A little familiar, okay, half. Okay. Okay, so I'm gonna assume that, yeah, maybe you know a little bit about this, but not too much. Okay, good. So what I'm gonna do now is to give you some flavor of other cases in which these towers arise. So they give you an idea also of how we work when we try to prove these conjectures in the string theory. Okay, so these are like the easy examples in 10 dimensions, but from string theory, you can compactify to lower dimensions, and there is a rich, very rich moduli space that appears with many different types of limits, and checking the conjecture is non-trivial and actually have given rise to many interesting connections with mathematics and the geometry of the compactifications. So I'm gonna go kind of quick over it, because since you probably don't have such a big expertise on string theory, it might seem a bit overwhelming, okay? But no worries, I mean, the goal is just to get an idea of how these conjectures are satisfied in more complicated cases and why it has been so important to find rigorous tests for this, okay, how we do it. And with this, the whole point that here I show you two possibilities, the compactification or string perturbative limits. So either we grow an extra dimension or we get new higher spin states. And you could say, okay, maybe that's because you took the easiest example, but maybe in general, there could be other possibilities, right? Like, understanding what happens at the infinite distance limit is like understanding what are the possible quantum gravity completions that exist in nature, okay? It's like, yeah, like how you're gonna resolve this is like the new quantum gravity. Since quantum gravity becomes important, it gives you information about the possible quantum gravities that exist from purely bottom up. Okay, so now I just told you that the only possibilities we found are extra dimensions and extended objects, like higher spin states. And you can say, okay, maybe it's because you took very easy examples and come from string theory in 10 dimensions. But I'm gonna show you that even going to very complicated manifolds and studying weird limits, we still have only one of these two options, which is quite surprising. Okay, so as I said, just a flavor of a bit more complicated stuff. I'm gonna choose two examples. The first one is tied to be on a Calabi-Yau threefold. So a Calabi-Yau manifold, so this is Calabi-Yau. It's some Kähler-Einstein and more complicated manifold that preserves its supercharges in 4 dimensions. Okay, so we get a 4D n equals 2 EFT. And the moduli space can be split between what are the hypermultiplets of n equals 2 and vector multiplets. So the important thing is that when we move in these moduli spaces that have many more scalars, the states that are going to become light, since we are in a supersymmetric setup, are BP states, okay, that become light at the infinite distance boundaries, at the infinite distance singularities of the model of the complex structure moduli space. So I'm going to focus on this part here, okay, this moduli space, which are vector multiplets. And we do this because everything here is very well defined. Like you have a special Kähler manifold so that the field metric, you can compute it in terms of a Kähler potential, which is given in terms of these quantities, which are called periods. So they are like integrals of a holomorphic 3,0 form of the Calabi-Yau. And BP states, which are also parameterized in terms of the periods. Okay, so the only thing that matters here, even if you don't know about this, is that both the metric in the field space and the mass of the towers are parameterized by the same quantity, which are these functions, these periods, which are some holomorphic functions on the scalars. Okay, so the scalar is C, etc. And how do we prove the distance conjecture here? Well, we have to prove that whenever we go to some infinite distance singularity, there is always an infinite number of BP states that become light, which is very hard to prove in general. And we want to prove this for any Calabi-Yau compactification, it doesn't matter what manifold we take. So this connects very nicely with some mathematical theorems in which one can show that the periods, these functions, when I approach one of these, this is like an infinite distance singularity, okay? When I go around this singularity, the periods undergo some monodromy transformation. And this monodromy determines everything, okay? So the point is that there is a theorem which is called the nilpotent orbit theorem, which tells me that the periods always behave in this way for any Calabi-Yau, any manifold, up to exponentially suppressed corrections, in terms of these ends, which are the log of these monodromies. So what happens here is that one can prove that in order to be at infinite distance, in the moduli space, this monodromy, this is monodromy matrix, needs to be of infinite order, meaning that even if I go around many times, I never come back to the same situation. So this is an infinite order monodromy. And then this infinite order monodromy is going to populate an infinite tower of BP states, because the different charges of the BP states transform under this monodromy. So if I apply the monodromy several times, I populate an infinite tower of states. And one can prove that the mass behaves exponentially for all these BP states, okay? Where the exponential rate, this order one factor, is just given by the nilpotency order. So it's related to this monodromy transformation, which is like a discrete symmetry in my theory. And it's bounded by 1 over the square root of 6. Okay, so this is all I want to say about this example. It's just one, I mean, this was important because it was the first time that we provided quantitative evidence for the conjecture in a more complicated setup. And we can prove this conjecture for any Calabi-Yau compactification of type 2B by studying the BP states and showing that these infinite order monodromies generate at the same time the infinite distance and the infinite tower of states. And that's why both things come together. Okay, any question?
And
okay.
Here
Yes.
You have compactified the modular space somehow? The point at infinity?
Yes, yeah, exactly. When I talk about some singularity, yeah, exactly. It's like I take, so the boundary of the modular space, like I compactify, right? So I take the cover and I think that is a singularity in my modular space, which is at infinite distance.
Mm.
And this is something which is typically done. So that you have, what you have to do is that you have the modular space and you study the different singularities. Some of them will be at infinite distance, some of them will be at finite distance, like the coniform. And what matters are those that are at infinite distance, because it's like these boundaries when they compactify. Okay. And what we learn is that there's a very part, yeah, like the physics around these singularities is very universal. Like doesn't matter the Calabi-Yau, doesn't matter the geometry, like you can find very general features, which tells you that, yeah, doesn't matter the details. The fact that you are approaching an infinite distance limit is going to give rise to some universal features in your effective field theory. And these features is what we are capturing with the Swampland conjectures.
So you said at infinity, you always get a monodromy which has a infinite order.
Yes. Yeah, one can prove using what is called the nilpotent orbit theorem. So if you take this form for the periods and you plug it back in the Keller potential and compute the metric, you can show that I dropped the pen. You can show that the metric, let me write it here. So the metric in this modular space, when you plug back this formula for the periods, goes as n over like c part of c square. So this is going to give rise to an infinite distance because this hyperbolic metric, but only if n is different from 0. And n different from 0 is equivalent to say that the monodromy is of infinite order.
Okay.
Okay, so then let me give you another taste of what is the other important example that has been studied in the literature. Sorry. Just 1 second. So here you could say, okay, very nice, but maybe you are satisfying the conjectures because you are focusing on BPS states. And maybe for BPS states it's obvious. And the more complicated things come from non-BPS states. How can we get non-BPS states? Well, it's difficult, but for example, we can focus on open strings. Okay, so pass. So the other example I want to give you is that instead of focusing, all this was closed strings, so now I can focus on open string. And I can think of U1 gauge fields that live on the word volume of the branes. Okay, so in string theory, you're going to have branes and not only strings. So you have higher dimensional objects and you have gauge fields also living there and states charged under them. So I want to check, I mean, before the same tower was satisfying both the distance and the weak gravity conjecture because they were also charged and they were BPS states. But now I want to check it in this case. So we want to check that the weak gravity conjecture is satisfied, right? And here you could say, okay, maybe open strings bring a way to violate this conjecture because the mass of the states that are charged under these gauge fields are given by open strings between the branes. And so the mass is given by the distance between the branes. So I can think, and the gauge coupling is just, since the gauge fields are localized on the brane, the gauge coupling doesn't change with the distance. So you could say, okay, what if I just move the branes very far away such that the mass becomes very large, but the gauge coupling remains finite? Am I not violating the weak gravity conjecture? So the question is, can we violate it by increasing m mass, that increasing the distance between branes? But without changing the gauge coupling. And of course, the answer is no, because otherwise I wouldn't be giving you these lectures. But it's funny how this works, because the point is that since we are in a quantum gravity theory, this is embedded in some compact space, okay? So the space must be compact, so I cannot just move the branes as far as I want without increasing the volume of the total space. So what happens is that, like for example, if I make it more concrete, I can take this to be DC branes, okay? And I have, like, for example, like type 2B on a toroidal compactification, okay? So that I place these branes on some different points of this torus. And then the gauge coupling of Yang-Mills of the gauge field is just given by the square root of the string coupling. The mass of the states, as I said, is given by R, so the distance between them in string units times the string scale. But what happens is that I need to write everything in Planck units. So the Planck scale in type 2B in this compactification is related to the string scale in this way. So that if I write the mass in Planck units, the result is this. You can check this as an exercise. It's just plugging the equations. And then, even if I try to make this radius very large, the ratio between the mass and the gauge coupling in Planck units behaves this way. So this is always smaller than 1 when the radius becomes large. So what is going on? What is going on is that when I increase the distance between the branes, the mass becomes larger, but also the Planck scale becomes larger. So the gravitational interaction becomes weaker, so that the mass in Planck units remains small. So there is no way to violate the weak gravity conjecture in this compact space whenever the Planck scale is finite. If I decouple gravity, I can do it in non-compact space. But if gravity is fixed and I have a compact space, then there is no way to violate the conjecture. Okay, is it clear? Okay, so somehow string theory always managed to satisfy these conjectures. And there has been several works trying to find more difficult ways, more cumbersome ways to violate it. Like, okay, instead of a torus, let's think of a more complicated manifold, like F theory on a Calabi-Yau threefold, such that I can make some cycles small or large, even without changing the total volume of the space. Okay, so this is possible. This is not possible on an toroidal compactification, but you can do it in more complicated manifolds if you combine like some cycle becoming small, another one becoming large, and so on. And this series of work, starting with this paper, they checked this scenario a lot, and they saw that still both the weak gravity and the distance conjecture are satisfied. So what happens is that, just to give you a flavor in 1 minute, I can think now, for example, of these 7 branes, so that I have some gauge coupling, some gauge field that goes to 0 if the volume of a certain circle goes to infinity, but keeping the overall space finite. Okay, so M Planck, I keep it finite. And then they ask, okay, since the mass doesn't change, isn't this violating the weak gravity conjecture? And what they could show is that by the geometry, it's not possible to do that without having another curve such that the volume of this other curve goes to 0 or intersects. And then I will have some DC brane wrapping this curve and becoming light. So it's I mean, if you are not familiar with these steps, can seem that I'm just telling you some magical story. But the punchline is that even if you take the most complicated limit you can imagine, you always find something that becomes tensionless, that becomes massless. And they show, in this case, instead of the compactification, what they saw is that it's a string perturbative limit. So you have a string becoming tensionless, and the excitation modes of the string are non-BPS, but still they satisfy the weak gravity conjecture. Like the mass of these states, when they plot it, is always smaller than the charge, and you get an infinite number of them, so that you also satisfy the distance conjecture. So the mass actually behaves exponentially on the field distance and polynomially on the gauge coupling. So both the distance conjecture and the weak gravity conjecture are satisfied. Okay. Okay, any question? Okay, so these are all the examples I wanted to show you. I mean, as I said, maybe it'll look a bit overwhelming if you don't know about string theory. I hope at least you can learn something from string theory by studying these conjectures. But the message is that there has been a lot of work in the past years checking all the possible infinite distance limits that you can have and identifying the possible towers. So these are just some references of different works depending on the level of supersymmetry, also not only in flat space, but also in ADS-CFT. And this has been very powerful because now we have classifications of the possible limits, the possible towers that appear, exponential rate, and everything. And still, we recover that in all these cases so far, there is always a connection between the weak gravity and the distance conjecture. Okay, so we find that in all these infinite distance limits, I mean, there is indeed always a tower of states, but this tower of states is charged under something, so that every infinite distance limit corresponds to a weak coupling point, and that's why both conjectures come together. Because so there is always some gauge coupling going to 0. And the question is whether this is something general or not. I mean, we don't have a bottom-up argument why this should be the case. I mean, why there should always be some gauge coupling going to zero at infinite distance, but it is some open question for research for the future. Is it always the case? Always? Can we argue this from bottom up? Or it's just a lamppost, no? It's a matter of string theory. And then it's not only that a gauge coupling goes to zero, like we always find that this gauge coupling corresponds either to a one-phone gauge field, so it's a decompactification, or corresponds to a two-phone gauge field, so I have strings becoming light, so it's a string perturbative limit. And the question, I mean, the fact that we only find these two examples was proposed by Timo Weigand and others, that this is a general thing of quantum gravity, which they call emergent string conjecture. So it's a refinement of this conjecture, saying that these are the only two possibilities that can happen. And this is also an open question for the future, whether we can find something else. And it's, I mean, I think it's intuitive that we only find this because since the tower is weakly coupled, I mean, you could say, okay, what about a membrane? Like, cannot we get a membrane limit in which the leading tower is some excitations of a membrane or a higher dimensional object? But we never find this. And probably the reason is the same reason that it's so difficult to get a perturbative description of M theory. So we don't have perturbative descriptions of extended objects beyond strings. That's why we only have string perturbative theory. And since the tower points a weakly coupled description of theory, maybe these are the two only options. But yeah, it would be nice to provide a proof for this, because if we can show that these are the two only options, then this is really hinting to string theory as the unique quantum gravity completion. Okay, any question?
Okay, thank you very much for another beautiful lecture. We have time for questions, please.
Let me also say, so today was about string theory because, I mean, I think it's important to learn something about the string theory when working on the Swampland, but tomorrow, if this was too much for you, don't worry, because tomorrow it will be again about bottom up. So tomorrow we will study black holes again and some further features of the weak gravity conjecture and how all these ideas that we have learned relate to other Swampland ideas in the program, okay? But yeah, if there is any question, don't feel shy. It doesn't matter what the question is.
Yeah. Any question? Okay, if not, thank you very much again, Irene. And we wait for your final lecture tomorrow. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. See you tomorrow.
See you tomorrow. So we'll be back in about 20 minutes.